I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty bored with the Corpse Lance build that everyone uses. That's why today I'll introduce you to a new one. First of all, I want to discuss the build a little bit. We still have Corpse Lance in this build, but it's not the main focus. We've replaced Dark Curse with other skills. By the way, the other build is much easier to play, but it's ineffective against Whales, and since we're often up against Whales, it doesn't make sense for me to continue with that build. With this one, our main focus is Fear. You could call this a Disruptor build or full support. We can apply Fear with 2 of our skills and still use Corpse Lance to immobilize people. So we can enter a crowded area and fear everyone away, which helps to disrupt the movement of the enemy. Your stats might not look impressive after the game, but your impact on the game will be greater than that of a Demon Hunter with 10 kills. I'm sure that if you play like this for a few weeks, everyone will remember you as that very annoying Necromancer. Well, let's talk about the build, starting with the skills we are using. As a side note, I tried this build with only 2000 resonance in my last stream and it performed really well, so this is a good build for low resonance as well. Well, it's time to delve into our skills, but before we do, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and leave a like on the video if you find it helpful by the end. Our first skill is one that everyone is familiar with by now, Corpse Lance. We have 2 different essences for Corpse Lance. The first one is a helmet that makes Corpse Lance reduce the movement speed of any enemies it strikes and immobilize any enemy hit by a lance 4 times for 4.8 seconds. However, these hits need to deal damage directly to the target. If the enemy has a shield when you hit them, you won't immobilize them right away. That's why the so-called overpowered Necromancer builds are so easy to counter. And that's why I've started playing with this build I'm explaining today. Anyways, the other one is the new offhand. Thanks to this, we can easily use Corpse Lance without worrying about targeting, and this essence creates 1 more lance from each corpse compared to the original Corpse Lance, which is helpful to immobilize enemies. If you want to focus more on single targets, you can use the original Corpse Lance by removing this essence from the build. It's not a big deal. Next, we have Bone Spirits. This skill applies Fear, one of the best control effects in the game. A main hand essence gives us a 20% chance to inflict fear on enemies, lasting 2.4 seconds. We have another essence for this, an offhand which changes the form of the skill. Bone Spirits now instantly unleashes 3 waves of many spirits, with each wave dealing damage and no longer consumes energy to maintain the effect. It has 2 charges. Next, of course, we are using Borrowed Time, and this time we are using an essence with it. Borrowed Time now also increases the damage and critical hit chance of the target by 9.5%. This effect is doubled during the duration of the curse if the target is slain. So when you get up after they kill you, you get a 19% critical hit chance and damage buff from this Shoulder's essence. And lastly, we have the Raid Form skill, which can apply fear to enemies for days. We are using the good old Fear Pants on this build, causing nearby enemies to flee in fear for 3 seconds and dealing damage to them. I am using 2 pieces of V2s to increase the duration of Raid Form to apply this fear to as many players as possible. Other than that, we have this Chest Essence which generates corpses as you move during Raid Form, which is important because we need those corpses for the Corpse Lance skill. V2s helps with this as well because we create more corpses thanks to that. And we have a main hand essence that reduces the cooldown of Raid Form by 0.5 seconds each time you are hit. Cooldown cannot be reduced by more than 1.5 seconds maximum, but it is still very good. And I'm using Soulfire as our primary attack skill, but if you want to use Bone Spear you can do that as well since we don't have any essences that impact our primary attacks. And we don't use our primary attacks that much anyway. Before moving on to the legendary items we are using, I want to talk about the set items because those are really important for this setup. I'm using 4 pieces of mountebanks, otherwise we can't stay alive long enough to be impactful against Whales, so we are trying to be as tanky as possible. Other than that, we have 2 pieces of V2s to increase the duration of beneficial effects. The main reason to use this is to increase the duration of Raid Form. And finally, we are using 2 pieces of Feasting Barons to increase the duration of our harmful effects by 30%. This was the first option. Using 4 pieces of Feasting Barons and 4 pieces of Mountebanks is the second option. I prefer the first one, but like I said, you can go with 4 pieces of Barons if you want, and that's all you need to know about set items. Now let's quickly go over the legendary items we are using since we already talked about their effects while discussing the skills. For the helmet, we have Emperor of Worms. For the chest, we have Gallowsborn. For the shoulders, we are using Flame of Forever. For the pants, we have Proximal Fear. For the main hands, we have Communal Rib and Stroke of Midnight. For the offhands, we are using Lower Creed and Soul Levy. Reforge bonuses can be really important for some builds, and this is one of them. I think using at least 3 or 4 barrier Reforge bonuses is really good for the current state of the battlegrounds, especially when you consider the number of Necromancers running Corpse Lance Immobilize builds. Like I explained before, you can protect yourself from that Immobilize effect with shields. From the barrier Reforges, you should look for block chance increase, damage taken from nearby enemies decreased, and maximum life increase. If you want to go for 4 pieces of barrier, the last one doesn't really matter. Just keep the one you get first. By the way, going for 4 pieces increases the absorb shield by 10%. And for the other 2 pieces, you can look for the duration of beneficial effects increase and damage taken from players reduced. Actually, the last one is optional. You don't really have to look for damage taken from players, just make sure to have beneficial effects increased. And that's all I can say about Reforge bonuses for this build. Now let's talk about cursed and ancestral properties. For cursed properties, I am using 4 pieces of Nettled because my other 4 legendary items have ancestral properties. Nettled is good because after you gain a shield for the next 6 seconds, every time you are hit, you will counterattack, dealing 40% of your damage to all nearby enemies. And I'm using the stun ancestral property. When it comes to the legendary gems, you don't really have to change the gems you already have. But if you are a low spender, gems like the Black Rose and the new 1-star gem Misery Elixir can be good to have. If you have the budget, going for Battle Guard can be really good to decrease the damage you take from enemies close to you. Like I said, you don't need a specific legendary gem setup to make this build work, so you should be fine with whatever you have. But if you want to make some changes, you can use the gems I suggested. I think I have explained everything I can about the build. I already made a separate video about the Paragon setup, so if you want to see the exact Paragon point distribution I have, you can check that video. But let me say that I'm using the Warden Paragon tree if you don't have time to check that one out. Well, that's all for this one. I hope you enjoyed this build. Don't forget, we are not looking for pretty stats, we are trying to disrupt the enemies as much as we can. If you have any questions or suggestions, let me know in the comment section. Thanks for tuning in and take care.